Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of The Numbers. Now, Philippe, we did have a bonus episode on the weekend where we chatted about the Conservative Convention in Calgary, but you hadn't gotten back yet, so now that you are back, how was your time in Calgary?
Oh, I had such a good time. It was fun. Also, escaping the Montreal winter, double-digit negative Celsius for 3 straight weeks. That was very nice to hit a Chinook there. I walked to the BMO Center from my hotel without a winter coat, and that was something. And also meeting hundreds and hundreds of people over there, people that really enjoy our podcast, which is it was very nice. I had to take many selfies with fans, which I hope they did not do that to mock me, to put like horns on my head or something. But it was incredibly interesting. Very glad I went. Must say, it's only 2 hours jet lag, but that knocked me. That I have to say that was in effect.
Maybe it's the altitude.
Yeah, maybe. Very interesting weekend. Pierre Poilievre has a good score. I think we said it was the most boring score, right? Didn't we say that? 87%. So we have now confirmation, pending not crazy events, that we'll have a rematch between Marc Carney and Pierre Poilievre. We don't know when, obviously, but we'll have a rematch. And so we have tons of polls to discuss today. Eric, where do you want to start?
Well, we should at least give a couple words to that score. Like I said, we did talk about it in greater detail on the bonus episode, so if people want to check that out, they can go to thenumberspod.ca. But before we do that, actually, I want to do a little bit of a housekeeping, because I know not everybody listens to the direct end of the podcast, but starting next week, our episodes are going to come out on Thursdays. Right. So if you are looking next week for a new episode on Tuesday, you won't get one. It'll be on Thursday. So starting next week, we'll have episodes on Thursday, at least for the spring. We'll see how the new schedule goes. But Pierre Poilievre, 87.4%.
Yeah.
We actually said it. You said it last week. We said what would be the most boring result, and you said 87.
And by the way, boring in that sense is good. We meant boring as...
Is good,
yeah, for Poilievre was perfect. Like having a very high score would have many, like 95 or something, many would have frowned. Having something in the 70s would have been a problem. And it was not just you and I who said that. I asked one of the most frequently asked questions to me and from me with delegates this weekend was, what's the threshold for safe or having problems? And they all said, anything that starts with a 7 is problematic.
Yeah.
And now it ends with a 7, but it starts with an 8. So Pierre Poilievre has this party. It's his party right now. He's fully in control. And he gave a rousing speech. I had the mixed reviews from this speech. But most of the negative reviews that I had was that a lot of stuff was preheated, which is normal, right? You do a greatest hits of your bits in front of the friendly crowd. But I think he increased that score with that speech. Many people walked out of the room really happy, smiling, and pumped towards the next election. So it was a good score.
Yeah. And so there's two aspects of it. One, it is I would say, normal score. When I woke up in the morning, because I didn't stay up late, I think it only came out at like 1 or... it was pretty late in Eastern
11
time.
p.m. Calgary time, yeah.
Yeah, so when I saw it in the morning, it was like 87. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's kind of that's a normal score. It's a normal good score. We have seen leaders sometimes get into the 90s, but it's not usually an opposition leader who just lost an election. They usually don't get into the 90s. There's usually some grumbling. And it wasn't in the low 80s where it would have been fine. We wouldn't have said he's in trouble, but it wouldn't have been impressive. If he had gotten 81, 82,
I agree.
I think we would have been like, okay, he survived. But if he had gotten, as you said, 79, I think that would have been, he would not have been able to, I'm not going to say he wouldn't have been able to stay on, but he would have had to keep answering questions about it.
That's true.
And
there's no questions now.
No, and as you said, if he'd gotten like 97, I think there would be a lot of, some conservatives who would feel like that did not represent kind of how the mood is in the party. Because I think 87 it feels like a representative number, that the majority, the strong majority of people are happy with him, but there are a few that are unhappy. If it had been 94, 97, I think that might have, some conservatives who feel like he isn't taking the right direction would feel like the party no longer is aligned with them. So we'll see what's going to happen over the next little while. There's talk about whether the number would have influence on floor crossers or these kinds of things. Who knows now? I think this is, as we said, the boring result, which isn't dramatic enough to cause problems on its own. So I think that's, he moves on from that and he moves on to the next thing. And the next thing is...
The election?
The election, or at least putting himself up against Mark Carney. We've gotten a lot of polls over the last little while. And some of them are pretty dramatic. I don't know
yeah,
how you want to,
well, let's tackle
these.
Let's start with the polls that were fielded just before, because we did our last episode Tuesday, and many polls were released the days after. So we had the Léger poll that had a 9-point lead for the Liberals, 47 Liberal, 38 Conservative, 5 NDP. That's really low.
Yeah, well, that's below the last election. Yeah.
Ooh, that's really bad for the NDP. Big increase in approval of Mark Carney. Big increase in government satisfaction. It was 8 points apiece, I think. Yeah, it was. So the takeaway from this, that yes, 9 point is kind of a lot compared to other recent polls, but Léger already had the Liberals a bit low, a bit higher than, higher than the average, and so having the Liberals at 47 when they were at 43 just before the Christmas break, feels like the polling firms all saw the same trends, slight widening of the lead for the Liberals. The Conservatives at 38. They're well within range of their election result. Really, this is not the Conservatives dropping as much as the other parties dropping. In that Léger poll, again, the NDP was at 5. The Bloc Québécois took a hit and find themselves in the mid-20s in Quebec, and it was only the Liberals who benefited from that. 20-point lead in Quebec for the Liberals, according to Léger. And so then we had an Abacus that had a 4-point lead for the Liberals. It's a smaller lead, but Abacus has had the Liberals and Conservatives essentially tied since the election.
Yeah.
And so when I look at this, I think of the Davos speech, obviously, the part of it. And then what happened in the second half of January, Donald Trump started attacking Denmark, Greenland, NATO allies, and international tensions rose up a few notches. And so perhaps it was a movement of voters saying we want to have this reassuring figure, and Mark Carney right now is it. But Eric, what did you think of those polls pre-convention?
Well, before, in the immediate aftermath of the Davos speech, we had seen a number of polls that were showing that Carney's personal numbers had gotten better significantly, usually somewhere like 6 to 8 and 9 points. But we hadn't seen a lot of polls yet that were showing a big gain for the Liberals. They were showing maybe 1 or 2 points, these kinds of things. But now we're starting to see more of that Carney's gain is starting to drag the Liberals up, right? Because they were up in the Léger poll, they were up in the Liaison poll, they were up in the Abacus poll. We saw also polls from Ecos and Main Street that had huge leads for the Liberals over the Conservatives. So we're starting to see that is having an impact on voting intentions. It's interesting what you said about the Conservative number. There isn't really that much disagreement on the Conservatives.
No, that's true.
Look, you got 38 in Léger, 35 in Liaison, 35 in Nanos, 39 in Abacus. You had 36 in Main Street, and Ecos was the only one that had like 29.5. That was really kind of different in that sense. But the Liberals, it's really where the Liberals are. Are they in the mid 40s to the high 40s? So I think that's kind of the question mark right now. The Conservative number seems to be pretty solid. Yeah. And I think that is kind of reflective of what the Conservative strategy is in that convention, right? It's about maintaining what they have. It's about trying to match the 41 they got in the last election and just kind of hoping that the Liberals fall back behind them. But there's not a lot of indication of that in these polls. The NDPs, you got the 5 in Léger, you got 8 in Liaison, you had 8 in Abacus. Main Street had them at 4. Main Street always has tended to have the NDP quite low. But if you're the Conservatives and you're thinking that the Liberals are going to drop back to 38, 36, you got to find some numbers where that's got to go somewhere. If they're not getting it, it's got to go somewhere. And we're not seeing that the other parties are picking it up right now. As Trump reinserts himself into the debate here, it just has the same effect we saw in the early days of the campaign, that it just shrinks down the support for the other parties. It becomes a polarized race between the Liberals and the Conservatives. And when the issue is Donald Trump, Mark Carney beats Pierre Poilievre by a huge margin, and the Liberal numbers go up. Davos kind of put a little personal aspect on it. I think it boosted Carney personally rather than just in the contrast. But it's kind of the same story that we saw nearly a year ago.
Listen, one of the themes that people came to me at the convention, because it's one of the occasions, it's like a focus group, right? Like I didn't talk to 10 people, I talked to hundreds, literally. And a theme that came often was, oh man, can the NDP just can go up a little bit? Can the NDP just find itself and have a real option for left of center voters so that we can split the vote? And I heard that many, many times. And so again, next month in March in Winnipeg, the NDP will choose its new leader, and we'll see whether it has an effect. But we had seen the NDP regularly in double digits in the past few months. I know Nano still has them at 13%, but in the new year, since January, those numbers have gone down. And again, 5 in Léger. It doesn't tell me that Léger is wrong. It tells me that maybe that NDP support or that renewed NDP support is extremely soft. Like people, I would support the NDP in between elections, a park vote. But when push comes to shove, the world is still under tension because of everything that Donald Trump is doing, and people have to choose between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, I think a lot of dippers would just go, okay, we'll support the Liberals, and that's a problem for the Conservatives. I noticed though in Pierre Poilievre's speech. Again, many of the themes of Pierre Poilievre did not change. Affordability, talking to young people, and I think that was the thing to do. But you know what was missing from that speech compared to others? The name calling. The adolescent, carbon tax Carney and all that stuff. It wasn't there. He didn't do that. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's by design. Perhaps to, again, be less of an adolescent when he speaks to people. And this, in the long term, could help, I think. The Conservatives, if Pierre Poilievre, I don't want to say tones it down because that's not the right phrasing, but sounds more like an adult in the room, really. And he really did that in his speech. Now, the question is it too late? Because you and I know that when politicians go down in approval numbers and favorability, it's really rare they go back up. There are a few cases, but usually, you start mid and then you become more popular, and then when it starts to erode or you become unpopular, there's no going back. Now, Pierre Poilievre has had pretty bad personal numbers in those polls that we mentioned. We had the favorability from Pierre Poilievre, 37 favorable, 56 unfavorable from Liaison. Abacus had closer numbers, but we know Abacus has a neutral option, and so, but it was net negative. And the same thing from the Younger Street Institute that we saw last week, that not only his numbers were negative, but they were getting worse. So this was pre-convention. Now, post-convention, I'm sure we're going to have a flurry of polls in the next few days that will show whether the needle is moved, and maybe it will move slowly. Maybe it'll take a few weeks for that effect to go into the numbers. But short term, waiting for the Liberals to stumble is not a good plan. Long term, it could be. But there's no long term for a leader today. If Poilievre goes into a snap election, perhaps this spring, perhaps next fall, if that happens and he loses, you would think it's over, right? The NDP will also have an indirect word about that. So we'll see.
Yeah, for the Conservatives, I think if they're looking at 2029, the chances are probably pretty good.
That's too long.
If they're looking at 2026, all the reporting suggests that the Conservatives do not want an election. Their behavior at the vote on the budget last fall, which we chatted about, the hiding behind the curtain alleged, suggests that they don't want an election. Yeah. But the problem is, if you're the Liberals and you're looking at a 47, if you're looking at a 51, like you saw on Main Street, you might get tempted to call an election. So even if Pierre Poilievre does have a tonal shift where they're trying to be a little bit more collaborative, they're trying to present, some united front when it comes to measures that they can do that'll put up a common front against Donald Trump, trying to remove the argument that they're being obstructive, so that the Liberals do not have an excuse to go to an election. The Liberals could still see these numbers and think that they have to go. I do think the tonal shift is interesting from Poilievre, because I think it's a recognition of how the landscape has changed in terms of his opponents. When Justin Trudeau was there, he was more unpopular than Pierre Poilievre. And people wanted to see someone kind of give it to him, right? They wanted to see someone be kind of snarky and aggressive and try to express the frustrations that a lot of Canadians were feeling at Justin Trudeau. That doesn't work when the person you're doing that against is more popular than you. So I think that might be a recognition that they have to change that tone, because it's not going to work.
It backfires, basically.
Yeah, like it was like that. Like the statement they put out. It was like 95% of the statement was the kind of normal thing that you would expect from the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre, but it began with praising Mark Carney's speech, right? Because it recognized that you're going to lose people at the beginning if you say, like, we all agree this guy's a jerk, but if everybody doesn't agree that the guy's a jerk, people are going to not listen to what you say next. So I think that is the tonal shift. And eventually, if it does get to 28, 29 before an election, maybe Mark Carney isn't as popular anymore. So Pierre Poilievre becomes better positioned to be the vessel for people's frustrations. But now, all the polls suggest that people are kind of satisfied with the government, that people think Canada's, heading more in the right direction than it used to be. So you got to change that. And so focusing on the issues where people still have a lot of problem with the Liberals, on cost of living, things like that, makes a lot of sense. Trying to talk about Donald Trump probably doesn't make a huge amount of sense for Pierre Poilievre, because anytime he mentions him, he probably loses a voter, right? Because that contrast still is not working for him.
I'll push back on that, though. Like, okay, so in that speech, Pierre Poilievre never mentioned Trump, which is fine. You don't have to mention the guy. But it was really thin on Canada-U.S. relations. And I don't say that, and I wrote that on our Discord for our members. It's not a criticism of me saying that. It's an observation. It was extremely thin on Canada-U.S. relations. So that's by choice. You would think that the Conservatives would have internal polling that showed them what their base wanted. This was not necessarily expressing, showing Poilievre to all Canadians, but it was to show that to the delegates, to make sure. It was for internal consumption, basically. So at some point, Poilievre will have to address the elephant in the room. Donald Trump, and not just Donald Trump, but what he's doing to the world and to allies, of NATO allies and commercial allies, is worrying for many Canadians. And let's say, not in this week, but in the months that come, if that uncertainty continues and Poilievre doesn't address it, swing voters in suburban Vancouver, suburban Toronto, swing voters that Poilievre needs, perhaps they will see that, okay, this guy, he talks about affordability, but one of the reasons that, things are not affordable, or at least it's hurting the economy, is because of the trade war with the U.S. So I just think that when you look at the issues that people care most about, problem with the U.S. is right up there. It's not number one. Usually it's just affordability, but you can't divorce those things. I wonder about that. Would he lose Conservatives that think Trump is doing a fine job? Because we know those exist. I met some in Calgary this weekend, and we see them in the polls. Like, would he lose them, or would those people say, okay, I like Trump. I don't like that Poilievre talks about Trump this way, but I have no other options, so I'll vote for Conservatives. At some point, the tent is big, but you can't stretch that fabric until it snaps, right? Mm-hmm. So I wonder about that. We'll get some numbers on this, I'm sure. Eric, I wanted to say we had the Nano's preferred PM tracker this morning. 53 for Carney, 25 for Poilievre. I think it was 54, wasn't it? I think it was. I think I saw 54. Yeah, 54. Yeah, maybe it's a typo. Sorry. So 54 for Carney, plus 5 compared to the previous 4-week wave. And Poilievre down to 25%. This is the same trend as we've seen. Those who criticize that tracker, maybe you don't like it, but it shows that Carney is more popular than the Liberals, and that Poilievre basically only gets Conservatives. It is what the numbers say. Until we see those numbers really tighten up, it would show you that Carney still pulls voters from outside the base, whereas Poilievre doesn't.
Yeah, that's one of the big takeaways, I think, and sort of the criticisms right now, I think, for Poilievre is that I know it's not as simple as this, but generally speaking, if you like Poilievre, you're voting for the Conservatives. If you don't like Poilievre, you're not voting for the Conservatives. And that just doesn't give a lot of room for growth. So the fact that he has such low approval ratings and preferences among NDP voters, Bloc voters, Liberal voters, means that he doesn't have a lot of upside. Carney technically does, right? Because he does poll
for now,
pretty well among New Democrats, okay among Bloc. Even as we've mentioned before, he's not rock bottom with Conservatives, so there is that upside. So it does really require the Liberals to fumble, the Liberals to lose support for the other parties to pick up. So it is just that the Conservative strategy at the time, it would appear to be, or at least the effect of it, is that they're hoping for others to do some of that work for them, and then they're just going to consolidate that base. And maybe that'll turn out to be the right strategy in the end. It's just it just feels like a strategy that isn't. They're not the active agent in that. They don't. It's not giving themselves a lot of agency in that. And it's. I guess it would be risky, but on the long term, it's probably the better strategy. It's just that they don't know if they have the long term. I'm not sure what the Liberals are going to do when it comes to wanting to go to an early election.
Well, let's talk about elections. So we know that we're going to have at least a couple of by-elections. We had Chrystia Freeland resign from her seat early in January. And now we have Mr. Blair in Scarborough Southwest, who will become the High Commissioner of Canada in the United Kingdom. So, I mean, those two seats should remain Liberal. Like, we don't really doubt that they won't, unless there's a dramatic turnaround. But there could be more coming. But now with the second MP, the Liberal MP, leaving caucus to do something else, that means that the Liberals are back to 169 seats in a House of 341 MPs. So they just got further away from a majority. Not that far. They only have to have a couple of votes going their way to have a majority. But I think the timing of those by-elections, if they are called shortly, would tell me that the Liberals do not intend to try to force an election at least this spring. Otherwise, you wouldn't call the by-elections. You would wait. But if we get into April and May, and those by-elections are not called, could we read something into this? That perhaps the Liberals would want to go maybe in the not in the summer, but late summer maybe? I don't know. What do you think, Hake?
It is a bit curious to me because Blair resigned a week after Parliament returned. I don't think they needed his vote. And because of the way the rules work, once the resignation takes effect, which did happen yesterday, you have to wait 11 days before you can call the by-election. So if the Liberals intend on doubling up University of Rosedale and Scarborough Southwest, they now have to wait another 11 days to to do that.
That's right.
And we're all expecting Jonathan Wilkinson to be the next, and he's in North Vancouver, Capilano. What are they doing? Come, like, if you wait another week, you got to wait another 11 days. So, like, are they? I'm curious about the thinking there because it doesn't make that much sense. They did nominate their candidate in University of Rosedale, Danielle Martin, who's actually well known in the healthcare sector. I was actually really expecting, once I saw that nomination on Saturday, that Sunday would be the by-election call.
Yeah, it would be
which is usually how the Liberals have done it, or at least they did it in the Trudeau years. This will be Carney's first by-election. So they wouldn't have nominated her if they don't intend on calling the by-election soon enough, right? Unless they want to give her a little time to work the riding, I guess. It's not a close race. They don't need to. So it is a bit curious to me. So I don't know. I don't know if they're going to wait for another 11 days to call two of them. Are they going to wait till Wilkinson resigns too? Or
Matt Generou? Matt General in Riverbend in Edmonton. He said he would resign, but he didn't give a timeline.
It's a bit curious. We do have these by-elections coming, unless they get preempted by a general election. I don't know. We'll see. The timing's curious. We got to keep watching what's going to happen there.
I got to say, though, like precedent would tell you that if the Liberals, at one seat away from a majority, say, we don't have enough, we want to go to the polls early, and that could really backfire. Like that would be a long 5 weeks. Mark Carney cannot ride his Davos speech for 5 weeks and hope that it will be enough. And
especially if they can just fill 2 of those seats with by-elections.
Exactly. Listen, you and I talked about this. There are many, many precedents that show that calling a snap election, if you're the government, because you have a minority and you want a majority, could backfire. It usually doesn't backfire on conservatives, like Doug Ford, Pallister, Brian Higgs, name them. But it could really backfire on the Liberals if they did that. And then you go back, you go into the history books as you were 1 seat short of a majority and you blew it and you lost power. And when you lose power, sometimes you lost power for a decade. So anyway, do you want to talk about the NDP leadership race?
I do. We haven't talked a lot about it because we haven't had lots of numbers, but we finally got some numbers. So these were the fundraising figures that ended on December 31st. So it includes the fourth quarter and a little bit of the third quarter when the leadership race began. It doesn't include any fundraising that's happened since January 1st. Right. But fundraising is an extremely predictive metric in leadership races. If you look at what happened on the first ballot in the last 2 NDP races, they matched within a few points of everybody's share of the fundraising. And you see that in the conservative leadership races, that fundraising for some reason, and for some reason it's the dollars, it's not the donors, it matches, it's your best guess at where candidates are going to end up on that first ballot. So I'm a big believer in the fundraising numbers when it comes to leadership races. And which especially when they're this stark.
Yeah.
That's the big issue. So Avi Lewis has raised about $780,000. Now the campaign says he's raised over $1 million, which makes sense because they're raising roughly $200,000 a month. So it would make sense if he was at $1 million now. But he's at 780. McPherson's at 415. Ashton was at 231. Tenniel Johnston was at 142, and Tony McQuail was at 95. In terms of the share of the fundraising, that's 47% for Lewis, 25% for McPherson, 14% for Ashton, 9% for Johnston, 6% for McQuail. With the exception of maybe Johnston and McQuail, who I think will underperform their fundraising because they got a lot of help to reach the 100,000 threshold that needed to stay in the race. I would not be surprised if this is the first ballot.
Yeah. Me neither. Me neither. Lewis. I don't know. I have this feeling, and we talked about it in our over-under December episode. I have a feeling that he's going to run away with this, and those numbers just reinforce that my priors. 47% of the fundraising. If that's the first ballot, then he wins, right? Yeah. I mean, you would have to have a huge, almost unanimous anti-Lewis vote on the second ballot, and that rarely happens. So
especially because this is not delegated, right? So there's not like you can't organize very well how those second ballots and third ballots go.
That's right.
There's always some people who don't kind of follow what they should kind of do based on their ideological things. So if McQuail and Johnston together had 10% and Lewis was 3% short, 100% that he gets enough of that vote to end up winning on the second or third ballot.
It's going to be interesting. Winnipeg, end of March. I intend to be there, and we'll discuss. Maybe the numbers will be there. We'll discuss it. We'll discuss this. I mean, going to those events is a great way to again do the focus group. It's not entirely scientific, of course, the polling we do there, but to talk to delegates, to talk to members, usually people are also very much more polite in person than they are online. So, I can confirm that trend.
Yeah. Well, I was there for Poilievre and I was there for Carney, so I guess it would be...
It would be, absolutely.
It would make sense to be there for Lewis. Or McPherson, sorry, I already gave away.
Or McPherson. Oh, my God.
The thing is, though...
Eric just called it.
Yeah. The thing is, though, maybe we'll get some last fundraising data about 2 weeks before the convention. It would be very rare for someone to have this big of a lead in fundraising and not end up winning.
Yeah.
That's kind of it. So if you think McPherson or Ashton has a real shot, show me some numbers that suggest that they do, because the only numbers we have right now are Avi Lewis's big lead, and I kind of think that makes him the overwhelming favorite. Not overwhelming. I'd say like 75%.
Okay.
Let's talk about some provincial polls. We got some polls from Léger, from Alberta and BC. We can go to them pretty
Also
quickly.
Quebec, yeah.
And Quebec, but we'll do Alberta and BC in a bit of a block here. So in Alberta, had a 13-point lead for the UCP, 50% for the UCP, 37% for the NDP. Little crumbs for all the smaller little parties, including only 2% for the Republicans, which is interesting. And then in British Columbia, we had 44% for the NDP, 38% for the Conservatives, 9% for the Greens, and 6% for One BC, and had some numbers on the Conservative leadership race. These are the first numbers we've seen in BC for a little while. For Alberta, we had that poll from Liaison that only had a 2-point lead for the UCP, so some uncertainty about what things look like in Alberta.
Yeah, but even that poll had the UCP leading in Calgary, and if that happens, we know the outcome of a potential election. Listen, this 50 to 37 for the UCP in front of the Alberta NDP, that's a solid win if it materializes. It just reinforces the idea that you and I have discussed in the recent past, that it just makes sense for Danielle Smith in the UCP to go early. Now, we don't know the timeline yet of the potential referendum on Alberta independence, but if I'm Danielle Smith, I go early, and perhaps you do the referendum at the same time, if you have to do it, right? And so I would not be surprised to see Alberta going to the polls. I would say maybe late spring, like May or June, or maybe next fall. But why would she wait? I mean, okay, she would wait because there's a fixed election day clause. But you and I know these are suggestions, right? And that if she feels that she's in a strong position to, secure another 4-year mandate, why wouldn't you go early? Am I crazy to think this, Eric? I mean, it seems. I mean, Doug Ford did it, and others have done it recently. It would not be shocking.
Yeah, no, unless she's really confident that she would win next year anyway. Why not extend your government for another year? If there is a referendum, it'll be that to me sounds like a very risky thing for the UCP. So the Léger poll found that 71% of Albertans would vote to remain in Canada. 18% want independence. 5%, they had this option as a third option, would just join the United States. So like 71% against is like, why would you even have a referendum when it's like having a referendum on whether people don't like puppies? Like there's no real point in doing it. But the problem for the UCP is that this poll found that 31% of UCP voters would vote for independence, 9% would vote to join the United States. So what is Smith going to do?
That's your answer.
If there's a referendum campaign, what side does she take? She would alienate a big chunk of her own voters if she had to choose a side.
Well, she clearly said in speeches and Q&As that she held that she is in favor of a strong Alberta within a united Canada. She said that many times, and she, I didn't listen to her speech this weekend because I was doing interviews at the same time, but I was told she reiterated that. So if she were to flip, it would be a big flip. And I think looking at these numbers, it would be even riskier. Perhaps those Conservatives would not necessarily go towards the NDP, but a majority of UCP voters don't want this. You have to appease the base at some point. But it's kind of a pickle she finds herself in, but some of that is self-imposed. So
in the poll for Léger in British Columbia, had some numbers on familiarity for the BC Conservative leadership contestants, and the result was that no one knows who any of these people are. The top one was Daryl Jones, who I think is known because he's like a head of a grocery store chain in the area, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And he had 19% who said they were very or somewhat familiar, and he was the top. Carolyn Finley had 13, Peter Millibar had 12, Caroline Elliott had 12, Ian Black had 10, everyone else had under 10. So nobody knows who any of these people are. They'll eventually get to know them. But right now, it's like for the general population, it's a blank slate. opportunity also for both NDP and the Conservatives, right?
And yet the Conservatives are well within range. I mean, they're down 6 points in this poll, but the gap was 10 points in Léger in the last poll in, I think, just late fall. So the Conservatives, whoever wins that leadership in late May, has a really good shot of being Premier of BC. So we'll follow that in the coming months for sure, because it could be very consequential.
Speaking of consequential, leadership race in Quebec for the CAQ. We got some numbers there.
Yeah.
There's not really much doubt about what the numbers are saying.
If you're Bernard Drainville, the MNA for Lévis, former PQ MNA, former PQ cabinet minister, then became a radio host, then came back to the CAQ, was education minister, now is environment minister, begrudgingly. But you cannot have in your worst nightmare a poll like this. Mm-hmm. Right at the beginning of the race shows that
the day before he officially launched.
Yeah, that's right. Bernard Drainville's personal numbers have tanked because Léger did his political barometer in December, and Drainville was like near the even mark in favorability. Now he tanked. He's at minus 20. Minus 21 rather, and Fréchette, who was mostly unknown. 66% of people did not have an opinion on Fréchette because they didn't know who she was. Suddenly her favorables are up. This is like the worst kind of poll you could imagine. So again, we don't want to say the race is over. It just started. There's still 2 months. It's April 12th. So there's still 2 months to go. But this is a really bad start for Bernard Drainville. What's interesting also is that Léger tested the voting intentions in this poll. So you had the generic question, still with François Legault as leader of the CAQ. The CAQ was at 17%. You put Bernard Drainville in there, they go down to 15%. You put Christine Fréchette there, the CAQ goes up to 25%, and it hurts both the Liberals and the PQ. Now, we know these hypotheticals are very hypotheticals, but they still tell us something. That I think an unknown like Fréchette could perhaps bring swing voters from both sides towards the CAQ. Now, we'll see if the race that's beginning now will change that. But it looks like Fréchette starts at the starting line with a big advantage.
And yeah, the fact that hypothetically Fréchette makes the CAQ competitive with the PQ, that would be huge, right? Because we've been kind of just assuming that the PQ is going to win a majority government in the next election. But if instead it becomes a kind of a close race with the CQ not too far behind the PQ, maybe because of how it shakes out, the PQ would still be favored to win. But if they don't get a majority, the referendum becomes a bit more of an unlikely thing. And I think that these numbers kind of make sense to me. This is because I felt like the PQ's numbers were kind of inflated by an anti-Legault view. Yeah. Because support for sovereignty is not high. This poll had it at 29% before the removal of undecideds. That's really low. And so if there is an option on the ballot that is no longer François Legault, that is no longer, that doesn't want to have a referendum, that isn't the Liberals who still have a lot of baggage, that could have a lot of appeal. And I think for Fréchette, she is less... I feel like she embodies less of the things people didn't like about the CAQ government than Drainville does.
Oh, yeah.
So I do think that this could be very interesting for this campaign, make it a lot more competitive. But because she is still relatively unknown, it does mean that it wouldn't take much to knock her and the CAQ back down if she ends up becoming leader.
That needle can move every which way if Fréchette goes up, because she says one dumb thing or has one bad answer and it becomes viral, and then it would be done. The CAQ is hanging on by a thread here. So I updated my projection this morning, my Quebec projection this morning. I still have the CAQ at 0 seats, but that confidence interval stretches up to 5 seats. And the reason I still have that, I see you smile there. That reason I still have that, it's because I'm using the generic ballot. I'm not using the hypotheticals. But the hypotheticals could soon not be hypothetical. So we'll see where it goes. But PQ, getting closer to minority territory in those numbers, but still with 39% of Francophones in majority territory.
All right, we'll finish up with the number of the week. How about I'll go first? So my number of the week, I had one from the Léger poll.
Okay.
I should have mentioned it when we were talking about Quebec, but just the fact that Léger asked if you would possibly vote for parties in Quebec, and there's a 1 point difference between the PQ and the PLQ. 44% for the PQ would consider voting them. 43% would consider voting for the Liberals. The fact that it's that close, I thought was interesting. But my number of the week, because I think it's the more impactful one, is 18%. This was the number of people in the Nanos tracker poll that unprompted mentioned Trump and U.S. relations as their top issue. It has gained 8 points over the last 4 weeks. It is now the top issue again in the Nanos poll. Not a coincidence that that is happening at the same time the Mark Carney's numbers are going up, the Liberals' numbers going up. When Trump goes up, the Liberals tend to go up. When Trump goes down, the Liberals tend to go down. It's an odd symbiotic relationship, but once again, we see it on full display here.
Interesting. My number of the week, I would say 33. This is Léger in Quebec asked, how much are you following the CEQ race? Avec beaucoup d'intérêt, with lots of interest, 8%. With some interest, 25%, total 33. So a lot of people do not care about this because I think many voters are done with the CEQ. So we have to be careful here to not take this overblown like Frachette would propel the CEQ. A lot of people are done with the CEQ, but that's still, I don't know, that figure interests me because it's not like she's just, Frachette, if she wins, she's not just going to become CAQ leader. She will become premier. And she could call a snap election. She could change. She's going to be chosen before the budget. She could change a lot of things if she wins. But let's not vendre la peau de l'ours avant de l'avoir mangé. What is that in English? Let's not
put the cart before the horse. That's not the translation, but it's the translation of what you meant.
So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, no, it's gonna it's gonna be a fascinating year for a lot of different reasons. Provincially, federally. So you can stick with us to get full coverage of the numbers at thenumberspod.ca. If you join, you get early access, ad-free access to the Discord, our bonus episodes. And again, next week we will have our next episode up on Thursdays. For members of the Patreon, our bonus episodes will probably start coming out instead on Mondays now. So we're going to change up the schedule for a little bit for the spring season. So Thursday we'll be back bright and early. And Philippe, hope you have a great week. And I guess we'll chat next week.
Merci beaucoup, Eric. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Have a great week. Thank you.